I'll tell you a story of Jimmy the Kid. He's a brakeman, you all know. He was born.
I call this music the true music, you know, the true country music. And if you hear me sing now, you can hear some of that in, you know, just regular songs that I sing. I do like, not actually a yodel, but go from one octave to the other, to another octave, you know. And that's where I got it from, really. Yeah.
Jimmie Rodgers was in on the ground floor of so much of what entertainment has become in our time. He was actively involved in recording, stage, radio in the very early days, movies. He was only about 14, I think, when he ran off with a medicine show.
I had the kindest old mother. How happy we were, just we two.
Till one day the angels called her, that debt we all have to pay. She called me close to her bedside, these last few words to say.
Son, don't start drinking and gambling. Promise you'll always go straight. 10 years passed since that party. That promise I broke, I must say.
Jimmie Rodgers was really and truly a blues singer, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
He was a blues singer with a yodel.
Yeah, Ernest Tubb and Lefty, and there again, Gene Autry, I think they all tried to mimic as much of Jimmy as they could, and I did too. You know, I wanted to know every Jimmie Rodgers song there was.
So I was 9 years old, and I was yodeling, and I was singing Peach Pickin' Time in Georgia, and it was one of my favorites to do. And anyway, I was 9 years old and singing a Jimmie Rodgers song. I think it's funny that, and I just think it's interesting that I'm an 18-year-old girl. I live in Texas, and I grew up hearing Merle Haggard, and friends with Miranda Lambert. She's, you know, a huge fan of Merle Haggard, and we're two young girls in Texas. Merle was influenced by Jimmy. I mean, everybody's been influenced by Jimmy, and it's cool, the chain reaction there.
I don't think there's an age barrier or like a generational gap at all anymore, because we appreciate the real stuff.
My dad, particularly in his early career, was obsessed with Jimmie Rodgers, and the music was always around, particularly the train stuff, you know, waiting for a train, the singing brakeman, all of that imagery, and just had such a profound impact on my dad, you know, as you can tell, the train songs.
You know, then Merle Haggard came out with Same Train, Different Time, I guess, while I was still in high school. And Merle Haggard was one of the handful of country artists that I listened to as I was listening to the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and stuff. And I'm somebody that really has never not known who Jimmie Rodgers was.
Jimmie Rodgers, he was like the grandfather of the Grand Ole Opry. And Woody saw Jimmie Rodgers one time doing his railroad show. They used a flat car for the stage. And
the foundation of it all. Jimmie Rodgers and the Carter family are, you know, two of the pillars of what we now refer to, for better or worse, as country music.
The Carter family and Jimmie Rodgers both made their first recordings in Bristol in the summer of 1927.
Attracting his attention, inviting him away.
The Carter family made their first record, of course, in Bristol, Tennessee. This article come out in the paper. They were hunting people to record. And so Daddy and them went to try out. And they selected them and Jimmie Rodgers.
You know, Sarah Carter, my grandmother, was was the only person to ever record with Jimmy Rogers, which, you know, from what I understand, Jimmy Rogers had a real short career, like maybe 6 years.
Well, Jimmy came into my life when I got my first radio. First one that you could plug into the wall. My mother used to be a nut on dialing. She loved country music, and she loved to get the faraway stations. He was the first one that fascinated me with reverb and echo.
You know, he invented echo. You know, he's the
the 8-track, did he?
You'll never believe what caused him to do that. He said, I went to a Jimmy Rogers session, and he said they had him sitting in this real slick room with no carpet, and no drapes, nothing. And said they had him sitting back a mile from that mic. And he said they got that echo on him, on that T for Texas. Yeah. He said Jimmy Rogers was my inspiration. And he said the way that man sang and the way he played the guitar, he said there's been nobody since or before that affected America like Jimmy Rogers did.
Oh,
He's the real deal, wasn't he?
He was the real deal.
I was first aware of Jimmy Rogers through Lefty Frizzell, because he cut so many the blue yodel.
Of course, Jimmy Rogers was Lefty's idol. Yep. And in fact, Lefty made an album kind of in dedication to Jimmy Rogers. And then, of course, even Merle. I mean, he kind of got was intrigued with Jimmy Rogers' work. You know,
what he did is he introduced Jimmy Rogers to all of our age category.
I haven't got a nickel, not a penny can I show. Get off, you railroad bum, and he slammed the boxcar door.
That's the thing that really impressed me about him is he, you know, and he got it from the black blues. You know, he didn't yodel like cowboy yodeling. You know, he kind of moaned, and you know, you didn't see the Gene Autry or, you know, Roy Rogers, those guys yodel like that. They did this kind of cowboy yodeling, and Jimmy Rogers would just cry his heart out, you know, through that yodel.
Usually these take the form of other people recording his material because it updates it. Of course, famously, Merle Haggard did the Same Train, Different Time series set in the 60s.
Late 60s. That one alone, I mean, I always say, I said, who did more for letting the general public know how Jimmy Rogers mattered than anybody? And I always say the first 40 years after his death, it was probably Ernest Tubb.
I agree.
And the last 40 years, it's Merle Haggard. There are more people who have gotten to know that music because of what Merle laid down and how than probably any other interpreter of Rogers'
But
music.
I would challenge you. I think the 1997 release that Bob Dylan sponsored and had recorded was terribly important, too, because of the range of artists in there.
Yes.
I liked them, you know, and I could hear him yodel, and I was about 1.5, 2 years old. So I go out in the kitchen and grab a chair, and we had a big Philco wind-up record player, his master's voice, you know. I go up there and I put that thing down there, and then he'd sing the brakeman yodel and the whole thing, you know. So that's where I cut my teeth.
Days are dark and dreary everywhere I roam. Miss the Mississippi and you, dear.
The fact that Jimmy Rogers was able to be such a big star and get his music out there during a time when you know, a dollar was tight during the Depression, and people had to choose between buying a Jimmy Rogers record and a chicken for the pot. They'd sometimes buy that Jimmy Rogers record.
I'm growing tired of the big city's lights.
Tired sights.
In all my dreams I am roaming once more, back to my home on the old river shore.
Elvis Presley grew up on Jimmy Rogers music. Also, his parents were exactly the sort of people from Mississippi who would have had all of Rogers' records and did. Elvis's mother Gladys was apparently particularly a fan. So that was in the house growing up. And so, yes, Elvis was very much aware of it. He also wound up on the same label, mind you, on RCA Victor.
The markets, as you've said, Benford, were rather shallow, or rather well-defined. And here was an opportunity to create a whole new market for recordings. It was important that the recording machines that were used for playback were mostly mechanical, so that you didn't need electricity, because until the electrification through the Tennessee Valley Authority, most rural listeners didn't have it.
Jimmy Rogers made a real mark and had, you know, immense influence on how we play music today.
He's got such a unique style. He had such a unique way of putting himself through, you know, that for me, trying to emulate him was just singing along, you know.
Musicians show people they're working in the tradition of and were influenced by Jimmy Rogers, whether they know it or not.
From an early age, I remember driving around in the pickup with my dad, and he'd always have either Bob Wills, Fats Domino, or Jimmy Rogers playing. And Mother Queen of My Heart, that's actually my dad's favorite Jimmy Rogers song, I believe. Every time he comes on, he can't hold back his laughter because it's just so good to him. But yeah, that's definitely one of his top songs.
The sweetest girl in the world is my blue-eyed Jane. We fell in love like turtle doves while the moon was shining down. I asked her then, I asked her when the wedding bells would ring. She said, oh dear, it seems so queer that this could happen here. You are my little pal, and I've never known a sweeter gal. My blue-eyed Jane, I love you so. And when the sun goes down and the shadows are creeping all over town, just meet me in the lane, my blue-eyed Jane. Janie dear, listen here, I've come to say